quiet street, an abandoned car, and a mother who left her shift and never returned home. Several months later, her name still echoes in a town that prides itself on knowing everyone's business. How does someone so familiar simply vanish into the night? And why, after countless attempts to solve this riddle, do rumors persist that something far more unsettling than a simple accident took place? Welcome to Horror and Crime. Tonight's investigation turns to a small-town mother who set out on a routine shift at a cozy diner and never arrived home. It begins under the quiet glow of a street lamp in a modest neighborhood, where the hum of a working-class life used to echo through tidy front porches and well-worn sidewalks. On an otherwise ordinary night, she closed out her shift, exchanged quick farewells with co-workers, and walked into the stillness of after-hours darkness. Soon, her car appeared on a deserted street, its key in the ignition, as if awaiting an immediate return that never happened. No frantic note, no final phone call, only unanswered questions echoing through the silent road she left behind. Those close to her have recounted how she loved her children, respected her neighbors, and balanced modest pleasures against the unrelenting demands of everyday life. In a town so small that everyone greeted each other by name, the notion that one of their own could simply disappear seemed unimaginable. Some claimed she must have slipped away on purpose, choosing a secret path for reasons known only to her. Others suspected darker forces at work, pointing to subtle tensions beneath the surface, a conflict she had kept private, or a chance encounter with a stranger on a lonely highway. Investigators arrived, lights swirling across the scene, expecting a solvable puzzle. After all, how hard could it be to trace the steps of someone so deeply engaged in the local environment? But each lead brought them face to face with contradictions that refused to reconcile. Neighbors reported hearing nothing amiss. Co-workers said she left in good spirits. By sunrise, speculation had spun in every direction, fueling theories that ranged from the mild to the unthinkable. We stand here, decades later, with the same gnawing uncertainty that plagued those first responders. Tonight, we will dissect every dimension of her disappearance. We will revisit the era, examine the social undercurrents that shaped the town, and consider whether any overlooked detail might explain how one person's life could simply be swallowed by the hush of midnight. Prepare to revisit half-remembered testimonies, scoured case files, and persistent rumors that never quite resolved into facts. Some say a quiet life can hide the loudest secrets, a veil so discreet that even loved ones remain unaware of the turmoil underneath. Others argue that a single chance event can derail the course of a life in an instant. We offer no certainty at this stage, only the promise of an in-depth examination of the story's most perplexing elements and the emotional toll it took on everyone involved. Over the coming segments, we will guide you through the timeline of her final hours, examine the theories that have swirled over the years, and weigh how the search for truth still shapes the community's collective memory. You will meet the people who tried to make sense of her empty car and vanished presence, hear how local law enforcement struggled with minimal leads, and glimpse the whispered allegations that emerged once the trail turned cold. We invite you to keep an open mind. Perhaps a crucial piece of information still lurks in a musty archive, or in the recollection of a witness who never came forward. In recounting her case, we acknowledge that every unsolved mystery is, at heart, a human story, one that speaks to fear, hope, desperation, and the lengths to which communities go in pursuit of justice. Let our journey into her final shift begin. Starting with the night, she drove away from familiar faces into uncertain darkness. We will examine the very road she traveled, the diner where she spent her last known moments, and the lingering echoes of what happened next. As we move forward, we promise careful attention to every discovered fact, as well as the theories that sprang to life in the weeks and years after her sudden disappearance. Stay with us as we embark on a prolonged exploration of a case that still stirs hearts and minds, one that has left a permanent mark on the residents of a place once known for its safety. If you think you have heard it all before, you may find yourself surprised by the overlooked evidence, contrasting testimonials, and unsettling possibilities that still haunt those silent streets. Let us step back in time to understand the social interactions that once enveloped this community. We find ourselves in the latter half of the 20th century, before the internet and modern surveillance systems became ubiquitous. In these days, towns often functioned by unwritten codes of neighborly support. People left their doors unlocked, held barbecues in shared yards, and settled disputes with a quick talk over a cup of coffee rather than formal mediation. To outsiders, it might appear quaint, even idyllic, but beneath that outward pleasantness lay pressures that accompanied any place struggling with changes in industry and population. This town relied on a combination of small-scale manufacturing, local farming, and service jobs to keep its economy afloat. Far from bustling urban centers, it rarely witnessed any major incidents. Families often stayed here for generations, passing along the same houses, farmland, or corner stores to their children. The local diner, where our missing mother worked, was no mere roadside eatery. It was a central gathering spot, an unofficial bulletin board where folks traded stories and announcements about everything from high school fundraisers to job openings at the nearby factory. Day in and day out, the chatter reflected shared pride in the community's achievements, but also a collective wariness of outsiders who might disrupt their comfortable routines. Those routines were anchored in weekly church gatherings, volunteer fire department fundraisers, and youth sports leagues. Parents cheered from the sidelines at Little League games, and older residents spent their evenings in the diner, sipping hot coffee while reading the local paper. This was a town that appeared to run on familiarity. Many recognized each other not just by name, but by long-standing family connections. Grandparents, parents, and children carried on traditions, and the introduction of a newcomer, be it through marriage or employment, often sparked immediate curiosity. Against this backdrop, our missing mother seemed an unlikely candidate for a vanishing act. She was not merely a face behind the diner counter. She was someone who greeted regular patrons by name, inquired about their grandchildren's graduations, and noted birthdays on a small calendar by the cash register. Local patrons remember her signature smile and willingness to stay a few minutes past her shift, just to share a sympathetic ear with a lonely customer. The sum of these small gestures earned her a reputation for kindness, and the diner's older guests would often remark that she reminded them of a time when courtesy was the rule rather than the exception. Her family situation also fit the common profile of a working mother. She juggled her hours at the diner around her children's schedules and was known for rushing home just in time to read them a story before bed. She shared a modest house with her husband, who worked on an assembly line at the local plant. In interviews given years later, he described their life as ordinary. Some days were happy, others brought minor squabbles about bills, but nothing that foreshadowed the ordeal that would soon unfold. Local authorities at the time comprised a modest sheriff's department supplemented by a few patrol officers. They were well versed in petty thefts, the occasional drunken scuffle, and periodic vandalism, nothing that demanded specialized crime scene units or advanced forensics. Many in law enforcement had grown up in the area themselves, forging direct ties to the individuals they served. Though this closeness fostered trust, it could also invite complacency. Some might say the department was unprepared for a complex missing person case that offered little physical evidence and no immediate suspect. Nighttime in this region often arrived with a profound stillness. The roads, flanked by dense clusters of trees, took on an eerie emptiness after the local shops closed. Only the lonely flicker of a street lamp or the rare passing headlights of a truck might break the darkness. Those who worked late, including our missing mother, understood the quiet well. Yet no one imagined it was anything to fear. If danger lurked, it typically felt distant, something one might only read about in the big city papers. Despite the outward sense of calm, subtle tensions brewed just beneath the surface of everyday life. The manufacturing sector wrestled with declining production, and farm owners faced unpredictable market conditions. Households struggled with increasing financial pressures, and some whispered that gambling or illicit activities had begun to find their way into town. Over the years, a handful of unverified rumors hinted at clandestine dealings in some of the more secluded rural corners. Whether our missing mother knew anything about such things remains unverified. But the mere existence of these whispers meant that not everyone in this quiet hamlet lived as innocently as they claimed. Turning to the family and friends most affected by her disappearance, we see an array of individuals who would soon find themselves thrust into the public eye. Her husband, a soft-spoken, methodical individual, bore the weight of sudden scrutiny. Close relatives, parents, siblings, cousins, rallied to form search parties, and as the days dragged on, they faced relentless questioning from the community. Meanwhile, co-workers from the diner wrestled with guilt and confusion, wondering whether they should have noticed something in her final hours. A cryptic statement, a tension in her eyes, or a stray phone call that might have been the first clue to a foreboding development. A few law enforcement figures stand out as well, including the local sheriff who initially believed that, with enough door-to-door inquiries, the mystery would crack. He was an approachable individual who regularly attended local events and prided himself on a practically spotless record of solving small crimes. He was joined by a detective from a nearby jurisdiction who specialized in missing person cases. Those experiences mostly dealt with runaways and short-term disappearances. Neither initially suspected the long, maddening complexity this case would bring. There were also neighbors, a wide cross-section of townsfolk, some of whom quietly harbored their own theories, while others insisted the matter had to be a misunderstanding of some sort, sure to be resolved by the end of the week. These were people who had known her since she was a child, or watched her walk her children to school each morning. They could not reconcile her sudden disappearance with the image of the reliable person they had grown fond of. Finally, consider how the physical environment itself might hide clues in plain sight. In daylight, the tree-lined streets and small commercial blocks looked picturesque, but under the mantle of night, shadows had a way of concealing secrets. The diner's neon sign stood as a lone beacon in an otherwise dark strip of road, and a few blocks away, abandoned buildings with boarded-up windows hinted at the gradual economic decline. Wet autumn leaves or winter snow sometimes muffled signs of footsteps or tire tracks, and the shifting seasons influenced everything from the availability of farmland shortcuts to the patterns of local wildlife that might leave confusing traces in the underbrush. As we gather these contextual pieces together, one detail becomes inescapable. This was a place and time where a single event, even a single misstep, could vanish under the radar if no one was watching closely. Yet for a woman so deeply woven into the daily rhythms of her community to vanish without explanation was a development so shocking that many refused to believe foul play was even possible. Others, however, quickly suspected that something darker had walked these quiet streets. Next, we will examine the timeline of her final hours in painstaking detail, the end of her shift at the diner, her customary parting words to co-workers, and how her absence came to light in a moment that would upend every assumption about safety in this small town. We will trace each known step and pause to consider whether any stray observation might have been the key to understanding what truly transpired that night. Our focus now shifts to the final moments before this mother disappeared, as well as the immediate efforts that followed. On the evening in question, she arrived at the diner for her usual shift sometime before sundown, greeting customers with her characteristic warmth. Patrons and co-workers alike recalled nothing out of place. No signs of conflict, no hushed phone calls that halted abruptly when someone entered the room. If she harbored any private concerns, she gave little indication. In reconstructing the final hours, investigators relied on statements from those who worked alongside her. Several described a typical closing routine. She served the last customers of the night, wiped down the counters, and made light conversation about an upcoming weekend event in town. A co-worker remembered her picking up a small envelope from her locker, though no one could say for sure whether it contained bills, a personal note, or something else altogether. Shortly before midnight, she stepped out into the cool night air, keys in hand, ready for her short drive home. What happened next remains an enigma. By morning, her empty car had turned up on a quiet residential street, parked neatly as though she expected to return any moment. Inside the vehicle, authorities noted her sweater lying on the passenger seat. The door was unlocked. Nothing indicated an immediate struggle. Tire tracks on the pavement were indistinct, making it difficult to confirm whether another vehicle had pulled up alongside her. Neighbors recalled sleeping through the night, claiming they heard nothing unusual. And thus, the delicate line between ordinary routine and baffling crisis had been crossed. When law enforcement was first notified, they approached the location with a sense of urgency. A missing mother who seldom deviated from her schedule seemed impossible to dismiss as a casual runaway. Officers interviewed nearby residents, checked local hospitals, and reached out to close friends. By the second day, search parties had begun combing through alleys, open fields, and abandoned sheds. Town volunteers joined, citing their deep affection for a friend they believed would never vanish by choice. Despite these efforts, no undisputed trace of her turned up. Local headlines covered the mystery in bold print. Beloved mother vanishes after late shift, accompanied by a grainy photograph of her smiling at a community picnic. The accompanying articles urged citizens to report any sightings or suspicious observations, no matter how slight. Reporters interviewed members of her family, capturing their shock and heartbreak for an audience equally stunned by the idea that someone so central to everyday life could simply be gone. Forensic teams worked within the limits of the era's technology. While they lifted a handful of prints from the steering wheel and door handles, they belonged mostly to her or people who had been in the car previously. No bloodstains or torn fabric suggested a confrontation. Nothing appeared stolen. Her purse, found under the driver's seat, still contained basic necessities and a small amount of cash. This absence of compelling evidence posed the first major hurdle. Without a conclusive sign of foul play or a documented reason for her to flee, theories began to multiply without a clear grounding in fact. Those who came forward to offer potential leads frequently contradicted one another. One caller insisted she was spotted at a gas station several miles away, chatting with a stranger by the pumps. Another swore they caught a glimpse of her car speeding down a rural road, passing a stop sign without hesitation, a behavior deeply out of character for a cautious person known to obey traffic rules. A few nights later, a local garage owner claimed to have serviced a vehicle matching the description of hers, but the date didn't align with the official timeline. Conflicting accounts triggered confusion and forced the investigators to recheck their data. They studied the co-worker's recollection of the exact time she left, comparing it to the earliest moment her vehicle might have been seen abandoned. Did something unexpected happen en route, causing her to pull over? Could she have felt ill and exited the car to seek help? The unanswered questions build upon themselves, resulting in a jigsaw puzzle missing key pieces. Additional anomalies surfaced as the days wore on. Rumors circulated that she had received a mysterious phone call at the diner earlier in the week, taken briefly, then ended with no explanation to nearby coworkers. Others mentioned she had recently spoken about wanting a break from her day-to-day responsibilities, though no one could confirm whether those remarks were serious or made in passing frustration. A few individuals insisted they heard faint shouting near the time of her disappearance, but those claims were never corroborated. Each new whisper introduced a fresh angle, but rarely held up to rigorous scrutiny. Meanwhile, media attention swelled. Television reporters from nearby cities descended on the diner parking lot, capturing footage of the bright neon sign flickering against the dark sky. Local residents found themselves under an uncomfortable spotlight, fielding questions about their friends' habits and character. Although the coverage raised awareness, it also fanned the flames of speculation, leaving the community torn between hope for a swift resolution and concern that outsiders would sensationalize the tragedy. In retrospect, the sum of these early complications proved vexing for law enforcement. No single tip stood out as decisive. No forensic clue provided a definitive path forward. While the investigation sought to trace her every movement, the reality is that she seemed to vanish between one breath and the next. With public pressure mounting, the local sheriff's department pivoted to broader strategies, enlisting the help of volunteer organizations equipped with dogs trained to track scents. Yet each well-intentioned measure failed to unravel the riddle. The footprints found in a nearby vacant lot, inconclusive. The rummaged trash bins, no sign of personal belongings. The unmarked envelope that a co-worker saw in her hands, missing from the scene entirely. In the midst of this confusion, the press highlighted one bizarre detail, a seemingly unrelated cryptic note discovered near the edge of the diner's property. It mentioned a meeting, a time, and place, though no direct mention of her or any recognizable name. Investigators could never firmly tie it to the case, and speculation quickly rose that it might have belonged to a passerby or an unrelated event. Yet the uncertainty persisted, contributing to the swirling narratives about what may have befallen this mother on that final drive. Together, the mounting contradictory testimonies, ambiguous evidence, and a conspicuous lack of resolution cemented the case in the public psyche. From the moment her car was located, everyone looked for that one revelation that might explain why she vanished and how. Up next, we will consider how the investigation shifted strategies over time, the procedures and resources that came into play, and the turning points where small oversights or well-intentioned assumptions may have caused vital clues to remain undiscovered. Prepare to witness the unfolding complexities that would test the resilience of the investigators, the family, and a community desperate for answers. Once the missing mother's car was discovered, local authorities assembled every resource they could muster, confident that a straightforward inquiry would lead to a conclusive answer. Yet with each passing hour, the case grew more perplexing. Police reports from that initial period reflect a series of methodical steps. Interviews with coworkers, neighbors, and anyone who claimed to have spotted her vehicle on that night. Officers collected items from the car, noting her sweater on the seat and the intact purse that raised eyebrows. It is rare to find personal belongings left so casually when someone departs voluntarily. The investigative files reveal a few unusual lab findings, though none led to a breakthrough. For instance, faint smudges near the trunk suggested the possibility that an object had been handled or moved, but no distinct prints were ever identified. Some hair strands in the back seat turned out to match family members, eliminating that clue from suspicion. Other physical evidence was equally inconclusive. Footprints in a muddy area near the roadside did not match her shoe size, nor did they match anyone in the immediate household. Over the following weeks, the sheriff's department devoted itself to analyzing every available angle. Yet one question hovered in every discussion. Was there a reason to suspect foul play, or did she depart of her own accord? The absence of overt signs of violence inside the car prompted a subset of officers to hypothesize that she might have left willingly. Another contingent, however, remained convinced that something more sinister took place. This rift in opinion hinted at possible procedural missteps. Some interviews were repeated multiple times as officers rotated through shifts, each asking similar questions of the same witnesses. Certain details, such as the exact time her co-worker saw her leave, were recorded differently across separate interviews, adding confusion to an already complicated puzzle. More than once, crucial statements went undocumented until days later. By the time a detective attempted to track down the original speaker, that person's recollection had shifted or dimmed. Potential suspects also entered the picture. The most obvious one was an acquaintance rumored to have argued with her over an unpaid debt. Investigators approached this man cautiously, but he presented a solid alibi for the night she vanished. After verifying his timeline, the authorities cleared him of direct involvement, though some community members remained skeptical. Another individual was a passing traveler who had been sitting alone in the diner during her final hours. He was briefly questioned before continuing on his route, and no solid evidence connected him to her disappearance. Still, the lingering uncertainty left law enforcement unsure of whether they had missed a chance to gather more conclusive information from him. Opportunities to explore leads sometimes slipped through the cracks. A few residents recalled seeing a second individual around the parked car, yet these accounts varied so greatly that the sheriff's department could not pin down a consistent description. In one version of events, the figure was tall and wore a heavy jacket. In another, the individual was of medium height, possibly female, and seemed to approach the car only briefly. Because none of the neighbors thought to report this in real time, investigators had to rely on hazy recollections. Compounding the issue, at least one of the more promising eyewitnesses moved out of state soon afterward and never responded to follow-up calls. As the case gained local media attention, several amateur sleuths emerged, scrutinizing public records, scouring maps of the area, and even organizing their own small-scale searches. While many shared findings with the sheriff's department, official channels were sometimes slow to incorporate these outside contributions. A few theories posted on local bulletin boards suggested that the missing mother had uncovered disturbing information, forcing her either into hiding or making her a target for those who wanted her silenced. Though none of these theories were confirmed, their persistent mention created a cloud of speculation that the formal investigation struggled to address. Some missing person experts consulted by the department raised the possibility that seemingly trivial elements could hold the key to unlocking the case. They pointed to unexplained phone calls, unsealed letters, or random interactions in the days leading up to her departure. Psychologists who specialized in family dynamics suggested the possibility of hidden stress that might drive a mother to vanish deliberately. Others rejected that hypothesis, citing her consistent love for her children as evidence that she would not willingly leave them. These conflicting opinions left law enforcement uncertain about which route to prioritize. A final category of overlooked evidence included a few random items discovered in the general vicinity over subsequent weeks: an unmarked key found in a storm drain, and a single shoe left on a roadside. Each prompted a burst of optimism that quickly faded once tested against the facts of the case. The key did not fit her house or car locks, and the shoe turned out to be child-sized. If there was a defining challenge, it lay in the thin line between suggestive hints and legitimate proof. Rumors filled the vacuum left by the absence of tangible progress. In time, the sheer volume of contradictory statements and half-remembered sightings created confusion. Some in law enforcement later admitted they had never faced a missing person situation of such complexity. Others insist that an early lack of consensus on the nature of the disappearance hampered their capacity to gather and preserve relevant evidence. Still, the investigators pressed on. They reviewed phone records from the diner, attempting to trace the mysterious caller that a co-worker recalled her speaking to. They conducted door-to-door interviews several blocks beyond the discovery site of her car, hoping someone saw or heard her in the moments before she vanished. They even investigated the possibility that she was lured away under false pretenses. Each approach yielded only partial clues, and over time, these clues seemed to contradict each other more often than they clarified the truth. With all these complications in play, the investigation found itself at a troubling standstill. By the time the first wave of leads had been exhausted, the sheriff's department was confronted by a daunting puzzle with no unifying theory. Up next, we will explore the wide spectrum of possibilities that soon took root in the community's imagination. We will examine the logical and the outlandish alike, from secret lives and random violence to unsettling rumors that defy conventional explanation. Perhaps somewhere in that tangle lies the reason this mother disappeared, and the missing link that has kept her case open for decades. With few definitive findings to rely on, the community and investigators alike found themselves weighing a wide range of theories. Some stayed grounded in conventional criminal motives, while others veered into more mysterious territory. Each explanation seemed plausible at first glance, yet no single account emerged as the obvious solution. Let us examine some of the leading ideas, along with the strengths and weaknesses of each. 1. Rational and crime-focused theories. In the eyes of those who took a pragmatic view, this was a matter of criminal activity. A set of onlookers argued that perhaps she fell victim to opportunistic crime, a random individual noticing a lone woman at night and seizing the moment. Another angle pointed to local disputes or personal vendettas. Whispers circulated about an unsettled debt or a feud that could have escalated beyond anyone's expectations. Members of law enforcement explored these possibilities, checking whether she had ties to known offenders or if any of her immediate family members had outstanding conflicts. Ultimately, no direct link to organized crime or a calculated plot was uncovered, leaving this explanation unresolved. Yet the possibility remains that someone out there, harboring unknown motives, coerced her into leaving her vehicle behind on that quiet street. 2. Psychological angles. Others turned their attention to what might have been happening inside her mind. The argument went that unrelenting stress, financial concerns, emotional exhaustion, or depression might have pushed her to step away from her life. Though she was described as a devoted mother, some recall small remarks about needing a break or feeling overwhelmed. Could she have arranged her own disappearance an escape from responsibilities? This theory gains a measure of credibility when you consider how her children were growing older and financial constraints reportedly weighed on the household. Still, skeptics counter that nothing in her known behavior hinted at abandoning her family without warning. Those who knew her best have repeatedly insisted she would never inflict such suffering on her loved ones. 3. Paranormal or conspiratorial theories. In smaller communities, legends often take root quickly. A few residents whispered about strange sightings in the surrounding fields, lights in the sky, unexplained noises echoing near the woods late at night. Whether these rumors stemmed from folklore or genuine anomalies, they sparked a short-lived speculation that her disappearance could be linked to something far from ordinary criminal activity. Others formed conspiratorial ideas involving authorities covering up a potential scandal, though no evidence supports these suspicions. While such narratives drew attention in local gossip, and later, on internet message boards, they never yielded any verifiable data that tied them back to the events of that night. 4. Community rumors and online sleuthing. Over the years, as technology advanced, online forums became a new platform for analyzing cold cases. True crime enthusiasts pored over old newspaper articles and archived interviews, comparing notes and debating theories. Some participants even visited the area, hoping to uncover overlooked clues. Despite the passion behind these efforts, online discussions often mirrored the confusion that plagued the original investigation. Every new detail generated a wave of conversation, but rarely led to fresh evidence. Locals also held on to long-standing rumors that she had confided in someone about a hidden romance, or that she stumbled upon illegal activities involving a respected community figure. Each rumor introduced an intriguing possibility, yet no one succeeded in backing it up with solid proof. 5. Weighing the pros and cons. Each scenario carries both points in its favor and notable gaps. The crime-focused explanations hinge on the assumption that a perpetrator left no obvious signs, which is odd in a close-knit town, but not impossible. Psychological motives assume a complete break from her established identity, something friends insist was unthinkable. Supernatural or conspiratorial lines of thought may explain the lack of typical evidence, yet they depend heavily on speculation that has never been verified. Meanwhile, crowdsourced investigations occasionally surface promising angles, but many lead only to further questions. Within the community, allegiances formed around one theory or another, and the resulting division sometimes complicated how people shared information. Those who believed she ran away saw little point in suspecting foul play. Others who felt certain of abduction gave little credence to an alternative explanation. This atmosphere of debate, in which even minor clues took on disproportionate weight, left everyone craving a definitive resolution that never seemed to arrive. Where does this leave us? The case stands at a crossroads of facts and conjecture, a puzzle built on pieces that might fit together or might be illusions. Our missing mother's story remains open to new interpretations, a mystery that draws in those who wonder how an ordinary night could transform into a decades-long disappearance. In the next segment, we confront the revelations that emerged after the initial investigation slowed, documents unearthed through legal channels, long-forgotten leads revived by local tipsters, and advanced forensic methods that might finally illuminate whether one of these theories stands closer to the truth than the rest. In the years following her disappearance, hope for resolution has hinged on fresh information that might finally unlock the riddle. Periodically, new discoveries have emerged, sometimes through legal requests for public records, other times through advancements in forensic science. One of the most noteworthy developments involved a set of documents released under open record laws. These papers, withheld during the original investigation to protect potential leads, hinted at correspondences between local officials and outside agencies, suggesting that inquiries extended beyond the sheriff's department's limited resources. Although the contents never pinpointed a definitive suspect, they revealed how multiple jurisdictions compared notes on her case in a coordinated, if inconclusive, effort. Forensic methods have also evolved significantly since the time she vanished. Law enforcement revisited hair, fiber, and fingerprint analyses with updated tools. While this re-examination confirmed that most of the prints in her vehicle were her own, a single partial print remains unidentified. No direct match ever materialized, leaving investigators uncertain whether the print belonged to someone who entered the car innocently or signaled a darker implication. DNA testing on collected evidence likewise yielded no breakthrough. Nonetheless, these scientific strides keep the door open for a future match should technology progress or a new sample come to light. Meanwhile, her family has never abandoned the search for answers. In interviews recorded decades after the event, her children, now adults, describe a persistent longing for even the smallest trace of closure. They speak candidly of birthdays and milestones overshadowed by her absence. Each passing holiday revives the question of what really happened during those final hours of her last shift. Friends who once gathered at the diner to share coffee and conversation still recall her welcoming smile, wondering if they might have overlooked a subtle cry for help. Some continue to distribute flyers each anniversary, refusing to let the town forget. Despite these heartfelt efforts, contradictions continue to baffle both the authorities and the public. One glaring puzzle involves a potential witness who gave inconsistent statements during separate interviews, claiming at first to have seen her alone and later hinting at an unidentified companion near the parked car. Investigators have never confirmed which version, if any, captures the truth. Another unresolved gap concerns the timeline. If she left the diner around midnight, how could her vehicle appear abandoned within an hour in a location that was several miles away, unless someone else drove it there? These unanswered questions cast shadows on every official theory proposed so far. If she truly left under her own power, why would she abandon her car with the keys in the ignition? If, on the other hand, she was coerced, how did no one hear any noise, especially in a tight-knit neighborhood prone to noticing every detail of each other's comings and goings? And what about the unidentified partial print? Could it point to a person long gone, or someone who still walks the town streets? Each of these points raises new uncertainties and reminds us how much remains unknown. What does this absence of closure mean for those who remain behind? If a single tip or piece of evidence were to resurface, could it reconcile these contradictions once and for all, or would it only deepen the mystery? As we reach the end of our extensive look into this small-town mother's vanishing, we stand at the boundary where fact meets the unknown. The absence of closure has left an indelible mark on everyone involved, from loved ones who have grown older, carrying the weight of uncertainty, to neighbors who still glance at every passing car, wondering if a stray hint might surface. In the immediate aftermath, her family struggled to balance normal daily routines with continuous searches, phone calls to law enforcement, and the silent hope that perhaps tomorrow would bring better news. Over the years, that hope has hardened into a quiet resolve, shaping how they speak of her memory and how they approach life's milestones. From a broader perspective, the town itself changed under the strain of this tragedy. Some residents have grown more protective of each other, installing floodlights and checking on neighbors with heightened vigilance. Others lament how suspicion and rumor took root, creating unease in a once trusting community. The local diner now stands as a bittersweet reminder, still serving its regulars, yet forever tied to the night she closed her final shift. While each person copes in a different way, all share an unspoken wish for the truth, no matter how distressing that truth may prove. Nevertheless, this story remains open-ended. Despite exhaustive inquiries, a jigsaw piece remains missing, one that could explain why her vehicle was found abandoned, who else might have been present, or what final exchange took her beyond the realm of daily certainties. If anything, her unresolved case underscores a cautionary lesson that even in the most ordinary settings, sudden events can unravel the threads of normalcy, leaving behind silence and unanswered questions. Before we close this episode, we invite you to consider how every new perspective might spark the insight that has eluded investigators for so long. If you have a theory, a recollection, or an idea that could shed light on this unresolved puzzle, share it in the comments below. Your voice may offer a valuable angle that has yet to be explored. We also encourage you to subscribe and follow this channel for further examinations of overlooked files, forgotten testimonies, and the remnants of unsolved cases that continue to challenge even the most dedicated minds. Should you hold any relevant information or wish to connect with those still seeking answers, remember that resources may be available through tip lines and missing persons organizations. Uphold respect and empathy in discussions. These are not merely stories, but lived realities for families and communities. Finally, we invite you to prepare for our next excursion into the unexplained. In our upcoming episode, Chilling Secrets of the Lake House, Missing Siblings Case, we venture into the perplexing account of two siblings who set off for a lakeside cabin and vanished without a trace. Conflicting witness reports, eerie local lore, and bizarre physical evidence have left seasoned detectives confounded. Join us as we sort through the tangled accounts and attempt to reveal what truly transpired on that weekend getaway. Thank you for accompanying us through this night of unanswered questions. May this story remain a reminder of how delicate life can be and how persistently we search for truth in its most elusive corners.